Okay, we're continuing. I'm giving you a very short quote from our next guest. And we're very happy that he's here. He wrote, "Unlike what some said as the Berlin Wall fell down, history did not end. Quite on the contrary, it accelerated." About this acceleration on all levels of society, zooming in on big topics like ethnicity, nationalism, globalization, multiculturalism, with a helicopter view all over the world and attention for the details of every specific local situation, I'm proud that Central European Forum, after several attempts, has now seduced Professor Thomas Holland Eriksen from Norway to join us here on stage.
Thank you. So, where should I sit?
Yeah, sit. In half an hour or so, we will be joined by Bojana Kef and Gabo Schein, who are waiting here on the front row. But first, Professor Eriksen, can I call you Thomas?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I should have.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, yes.
I want to ask you a very personal question before you start talking about the overheated world that we live in. Could you raise your right hand? So, you look in everything like a perfect, well-dressed, civilized professor, but you have this armband.
Oh, yes.
What does the armband mean?
Well, maybe it's part of my cosmopolitan identity. It was a gift given to me by a friend in China last year. And it's meant to bring, and I rather like it. I haven't been wearing this kind of stuff since I was a teenager, you know, but I rather liked it. And it's meant to bring happiness and good health. And at the time, I felt I could need both. Mm-hmm. So, and it helped. It works.
Good.
I'm happier now than I was before I started to wear it.
Okay. I was just curious because I know you travel all across the globe, so I guess this must have come from far away, and it did.
And it was also a personal gift.
Good. Now, Thomas Holland Eriksen is a professor of social anthropology at the University of Oslo. He is the president of the European Association of Social Anthropologists. He's also a member of the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters. So, this is one of the most famous anthropological minds on this planet, and he uses the planet as his research domain in order to prevent all of us to go up in flames in this overheated world. Can you tell us about... This is the most recent book, Overheating, an Anthropology of Accelerated Change. Now, you've been here for a few days. Yesterday you were having your own program in Banska Bystrica. Today you were here. You were listening to the earlier discussions. Can you try to introduce us into your thinking about the overheated world and end up in this part of the world?
I'll give it a try. Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks for your introduction. I'll give it a try. So I'm going to try basically to say something general about overheating as a metaphor for talking about the contemporary era, and then try to zoom in, okay, on what's going on in this part of the world. So when you say overheating, I mean, the first time you say overheating, many people would think that this is just another project about climate change. You know, it's just about, you know, how we should, you know, use less, we should eat less meat, and we should fly less, and we should drive less, and so on and so forth. And that is part of the story, but it's not the whole story, because overheating is about speed. You know, in physics, heat and speed are two sides of the same coin. When something heats up, the molecules travel faster. So, in other words, it's about acceleration. Now, acceleration and speed have been part of modernity since the beginning, and it's been considered good. Speed and acceleration have been associated with progress and growth and development. I mean, think about transportation, for example. What a boon it was to the world economy when you could suddenly travel predictably by steamboat to America from Europe, rather than having to be, victim to or subject to the vagaries of weather on the sailing ship. Or when the first transatlantic cable was laid in 1869. So you could transmit messages from London to New York within a few minutes rather than weeks. It was clearly, I mean, a great boost to the world economy. So speed, modernity, progress and development have gone hand in hand. Now I'm saying a number of things about the kind of speed that we're experiencing now. One of them is that since the early 1990s, we've experienced the kind of acceleration of acceleration. Things which went fast before move even faster now. The growth in world trade, the growth in energy use, the growth in the production of waste, rubbish, plastic in the ocean, that sort of thing. And the change in global temperature, and I could mention a number. I haven't even mentioned information technology, the spread of the mobile phone, the internet, eventually the smartphone, and the social media. So and mobility, the way in which tourism has gone from a couple of 100 million international tourist arrivals a year in the late 1970s to more than 1.2 billion in 2017. It's been a six-time doubling in just a generation. So this is overheating. Things are happening faster, things are changing faster. That's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say is that it is as if it is out of control. There's no instance, there's no institution, there's no, as it were, power that can say that it's good now, it's enough. We should cool down. We should do things a bit more slowly. We're destroying the planet. We're destroying our own minds. It's not good for us. It's not making us happy. It's just making us efficient consumers who are undermining the conditions for our own survival. Because remember, this is a mining country. Coal mining has not been the mainstay of Slovakia, but there is lots of coal mining in this part of Europe. And we live in a society based on coal. It's a coal-based society. We have a lot to thank the coal for. The coal and the fossil fuels were our blessing for 200 years. It was the salvation of humanity for 200 years and brought us this wonderful modernity that we are now enjoying. But what was our salvation for 200 years is slowly turning into our damnation because of climate change and pollution. And it's very hard to get our heads around this. And that is also overheating. That's another important aspect of overheating. How can we deal with this loss of a narrative of progress that we have relied on for 200 years? Okay? So that's another important dimension. But, okay, just one final thing before I very quickly say something about this part of the world. If you rub your hands together really quickly, like this, okay? Yeah, which we do at this time of the year, quite a bit in this part of the world. They warm up. If you could do it incredibly fast, they would eventually burn up. But you can't, because you have an inbuilt thermostat, which tells your body that it's good now, it's fine. You can stop, because you're warm, okay? You don't want to turn into carbon or to charcoal. The danger with overheating in the realms of finance, the environment, identity, and so on, is that there is no instance, there's no thermostat which can stop it. So it's out of control. In fact, the Italian translation of this book is called Fuori controllo, out of control, which I think is a good translation of the concept. Now, about Central Europe. There's a lot, okay, just two things, and then we can continue our conversation. Two things I'd like to say about that is one overheating effect is a sense of powerlessness. I'm being overrun. There are people who are taking decisions which affect my life, and they never ask me for my opinion. Those people could be in my own local government, they could be in Brussels, or it could be powerful global corporations. And they're more and more distant every year. So it's harder and harder to get in touch with them. You don't even know where to send the email if you want to voice a complaint. Whereas, I mean, in the 19th century, you'd mount a strike against a capitalist because you knew who it was. Now we no longer know who the capitalist is. That's one thing. Another thing is that...
In between, one question.
Sorry.
Your own speech is quite accelerating.
I know, yeah.
And
Yeah.
we don't want to burn up our translators back there,
yeah.
So could you...
I'm sorry, yeah. It's, I've managed to slow down in a number of areas, but somehow not in the field of speech. Just one final sentence, and then we'll move on about Central Europe. One is the resentment that we have spoken about. I mean, you spoke about this, you discussed this earlier, the resentment against the state, the feeling that society and the state are not really on the same page, and that decisions are being taken which are my voice was not being heard. Maybe I could say as what I liked. Maybe I have full freedom of expression, but I'm not being listened to. Nobody cares what I say. The people in Washington, in Westminster, in London, wherever, Brussels. So Brexit, Trump, that sort of phenomenon, clearly overheating effects in my mind. And the second is that one of the aspects of rubbing your hands together is not only that they warm up, but that they also create friction. So overheating creates friction between the different scales, between the different temporalities, between the different ways in which we relate to the outside world. And this is also part of the story about the recent rise of identity politics in Central Europe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And no, I mean, if the mind of a world traveler is coming at you at this speed, you need some time to slow down and break it down. I'm sure the same goes for you. You wrote something in the introduction to An Overheated World, which I would like you to quote, and it is this paragraph right here.
The one in the middle?
Yes, this one.
Okay. All right, thank you. The steady acceleration of communication and transportation of the last two centuries. Read it
slowly.
Yep. Of the last 2 centuries has facilitated contact and made isolation difficult, and is weaving the growing global population ever closer together, without erasing cultural differences, local identities, and power disparities. Indeed, as decades of research on collective identification has shown, intensified identity management and the assertion of group boundaries is a likely outcome of increased contact and the perceived threat to group integrity. The standardization of identity, witnessed, for example, in nationalism and religious revivalism, is a feature of modernity, not of tradition, although it is frequently dressed in traditional garb. Yeah. Yeah, well, that was reasonably half sensible, I guess.
It was totally sensible and totally on point in this part of Europe as well, I think, because we started out today with Eric, who is in politics now in your own country after having survived Utoya and Breivik. We spoke with the organizers of the protests in Romania, Czech Republic, and here. All of them voiced the wish to reach out to the people who feel isolated, left behind. Because otherwise they will vote for the Trumps and the Orbans and the Brexits. But you point out something very important here. The acceleration of the world, on the surface it looks like it connects everybody across the planet, but if you go into specific localities, it actually produces, as you say here, intensified identity management and the assertion of group boundaries, which is exactly the opposite of the so-called interconnected planet. Can you describe us or give us examples of how you see that? Groups moving together, creating their own boundaries because they feel lost and left behind?
Absolutely, and I think this is a sentiment that we need to take really seriously, and not just treat with contempt and disdain, because it's a situation which is felt for good reasons by many people, that the world is moving really fast and nobody cares about me. You know, I live in an old mining community. The mine was closed down decades ago, and no politician from the capital has even visited the area and suggested ways in which we could could create the future and hope and so on. So that's a real problem, a real phenomenon. And there is a center-periphery problem here. The periphery doesn't have to be geographically peripheral. It can also be inside the city. But you could say that there is a dialectic, or there's a dynamic relationship between, on the one hand, what, as you pointed out, the free flow of everything across the world, you know, the growth of Chinese trade and the internet and the social media and tourism and whatnot, and the use of the English language, which enables this global conversation, which is fantastic, by the way, which makes it possible for us to have a global conversation. On the one hand, and on the other hand, the call for a return to tradition, for purity, for boundaries, for getting, you know, all of these contaminating influences out. So it's no coincidence that we live at a time where, at the same time, there is more openness, there's more mobility and more communication and more learning across boundaries. And on the other hand, there is an obsession with building walls. Mm-hmm. You know, you have the Israel-Palestine wall, you have Trump's dream of a wall against Mexico, you have all of these little walls around gated communities in class-divided cities where the rich are so afraid of the poor that they have to have 4-meter walls, you know, with glass on top in order to feel secure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a seesaw, we're trying to find a balance between, on the one hand, purity and boundaries, and flows and impurity. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think when I listen to you, it sounds like you're describing the situation in Central Europe. But as a researcher, as an anthropologist, as a traveler, do you see this same phenomenon happening all over?
Thanks for your question. I think that's a very important perspective, because we all know our own society pretty well, and we all think it's unique. And yes, it is. All societies are unique up to a certain point. But then there are also these global similarities, patterns, the same tendencies affecting people everywhere. And that was the premise for this research project, which involved quite a few researchers, you know, went around the world and studied in the Philippines, in Sierra Leone, in West Africa, in Peru, in South America, and so on. And we found some of the same patterns everywhere. So the feeling that there is a growing gap between my community and the people and the decisions are being taken is fairly universal. The discourse around purity and boundaries versus contamination, impurity and flows is also quite universal. But it's being expressed in different ways. You know, in the Philippines, you have this mad president who thinks that if he can only kill everybody who's involved with drugs, it will be a good society. So those are the Muslims of the Philippines. Well, not really. They have Muslims, real Muslims in southern Philippines, but you see what I mean? The same as Moroccans in Amsterdam. I mean, if you can only get these people out, everything will be fine. In Australia, there's an obsession with invasive species. With the cane toad, with South African bushes, with trees and plants and animals which are not supposed to be there. They didn't care much about those 50 years ago, so why do they care now? Mm-hmm. So because there is a general fear that we are losing control. We need to regain control of our boundaries. Mm-hmm. And I think that has to be taken very seriously. Mm-hmm. And we need to think about how to balance openness and control and autonomy mm-hmm. and control of boundaries. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now you described fear of communication, fear of contamination. Yeah. You described the reflex of purity, mm-hmm. of building walls, of building homogeneous societies. You describe them as, let's say, the result or the leftover of the acceleration. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But could it also be true that this acceleration, including the technological, including the economical harmonization across the world, it's that this side effect is actually built into that acceleration?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right.
So it's not like an accidental result, but it's actually an aim.
Well, at least it's a direct effect. Absolutely, it's a direct effect of acceleration. Just as you might say that nostalgia is a result of change, of modernity, that you start yearning for something that may have existed in the past, which probably didn't exist in the past, but you have ideas about it having existed in the past, and you want that to return, because then life was simple, and the world was readable, it was legible, and you could feel at home in it. And nowadays, things are changing so fast, and nobody asks me for my opinion, and who can I blame, and what can I do, you know? So at least I can build a wall around my own little identity and hope that it holds. But it's not going to hold. I mean, we're going to find a way of swimming in this, these murky waters of 21st century modernity. We have to make peace with diversity. That was a lesson that Norway should have learned after the terrorist attack. That ethnic cleansing is clearly not the way to go, because then we're going to get more of this kind of stuff. So we must learn to live with impurity and with modernity, as Habermas spoke of, as an unfinished project. But you're absolutely right. And nostalgia is fine, you know, as long as you don't use it to produce hatred, suspicion, and the exclusion of others. So what characterizes the new populist movements, from Trump to Duterte, and I haven't even mentioned Narendra Modi in India, who's a very dangerous politician and not very well known in Europe, is that they thrive on the suspicion of others and on creating division, right? Which responsible politicians don't, because they try to be everybody's leaders and they try to make compromises. So we should be wary of this. And this is also these are also overheating effects, because remember, in this incredibly complex world where things are changing so fast in the realm of technology, trade, migration. You know, I'm a migration researcher, among other things, and my feeling was some years ago that I just went out for a coffee, and when I returned to my office, the statistics had changed, you know, so I had to update my article. So things are changing really fast. In this kind of world, there's a huge demand for simple answers to complex questions, and as intellectuals, we should resist that. We should insist that complex questions need complex answers. There's no easy way out. We have to muddle through.
This was actually mentioned yesterday too by Nathalie Nougarede in the conversation. She said, she's a journalist for The Guardian. She said, if there's anything that I would wish for right now is not to simplify things that are complex. And a lot of things are complex, so let's be complex. Before we ask our next guest on stage, I just want to ask you, through your anthropological eye, how did you look at the three activists on stage just now who are mobilizing the protests in Romania, Czech Republic and Slovakia? What was your impression to begin with?
Well, I think it's very promising that we get this kind of social movement, that there is a social engagement, and that there is a feeling that something important is at stake when it comes to democratic values. And one could also imagine a situation where the engagement expands into an alternative vision for society, because what we really need now is a new story about progress, which does not destroy the planet, which does not lead to huge inequalities, which is not based on the financialization of the economy. So there's a great promise there in a society which refuses to do as it's told, and which stubbornly insists on upholding some sacred values to do with common decency. So I think it's incredibly promising, and I wish we had something similar in the part of the world where I live. Yeah.
Yeah, because we started the afternoon with Eric, who chose the path through the political institutions. Totally valid, legitimate.
Absolutely.
But he's not in the streets.
No. Exactly. So, and the problem is, I mean, you know, we're probably going to talk more about that in a minute, but one of the recipes for populism is really to have arrogant politicians who are too distant, too aloof, and who don't listen, and who are in cahoots with powerful financial interests, which are abstract, which are virtual, which are invisible, but which govern much of our world. You know, the Google, Amazon kind of world, but also the world of financial banking. So you need a society that stands up against this and says that be concrete, be tangible, and talk about a world that we can recognize and that we can experience, and not just something abstract and virtual. And don't say Tina, don't say there is no alternative. There is always an alternative.
And the funny thing is, gathering thousands of people of the streets, that's actually almost the oldest tool of protest in our history. And still, every time again, every generation again, it proves to work.
Yeah, but often it doesn't work immediately, and often it has been written off as being futile and a waste of time, because nothing happens in the first couple of days. But when people persist, as they did here, during the Velvet Revolution, you persist for days and weeks and even months. Sooner or later, it's going to have effects, and when it grows. From a few hundred to thousands to millions. And this kind of thing can also happen. Yeah. So we can only hope that similar kind of revolt will happen elsewhere, but only if people have a good alternative in place. We don't want to descend into anarchy, do we?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, this seems like a good time to invite our next guests on the stage together with you. Božena Kev, writer from Poland, and Gabor Schein, a writer from Hungary. Under your applause. Božena. Start with you. Poet, essayist, film critic, journalist, feminist activist, researcher at Polish Academy of Science, literary researcher at Jewish Historical Institute, and lecturer in gender studies at the Warsaw University. It's amazing you actually had time to be here. But you did.
In fact, I'm a poet and a writer. But it doesn't supply me enough money to survive, and that's why I have those other jobs.
There must be, I accept that totally. There must be more than that
half
too.
Joke.
Yeah. And it's actually a pity that we cannot speak with you now really as a poet.
Okay. No, it's
because this is not a conversation about poetry. This is a conversation about a world that's accelerating, as you've noticed. If you listen to Thomas Erikson, do you think the phenomena that he's describing globally, that they are valid to the society that you live in?
Yes. From this point of view, how to say, the highest possible point of view. Yes. But of course, I'm living in Poland. I'm not looking from this point of view. But sometimes, yes, because I'm trained as a philosopher. So it's a kind of natural for me also to have this perspective. And I'm a universalist in this enlightenment sense of the word. So yes, but from the other hand, of course, I'm in great emotions from time to time. Not every time, because I wouldn't survive that in Poland, having to do with what I have to do every day. Yes, because I'm living in a country which looks now like it was never anything like enlightenment there, nothing like that. And, partially that's true. I mean, enlightenment wasn't very deeply rooted, something in, era in Poland, but somehow it was. And in fact, I'm living in a country which is back in its 17th century, which was very anarchistic, rooted in Catholic Church, just being victorious on Counter-Reformation, because they were Protestants in Poland, against, I think, maybe a very popular opinion that they were not. They were, and in fact, quite big number, about 20% of nobility. And living in a situation when there is war between history and mythology. History and mythology is very important. This is very important. And those points really take me back into the history, to the places I don't want to be. But from this very high point of view, that is true. The form is like that in Poland. And maybe I was naive in the 90s, and maybe not, because 90s in Poland, they were full of hope, like probably in all countries of this part of Europe, but still we have a victorious Catholic Church which is more tribal than Christian. Yes, this is a church of nationalistic, tribal nationalistic ideology, the first, which is going along with politics of the same kind. So, and it was in 90s also. So, as a feminist, I can say only that women in Poland lost a lot. Yes, we have anti-abortion law, which is horrible. So
You're talking about Poland as a country that didn't skip the Enlightenment. It didn't even reach the Enlightenment, or it's almost as if it never happened.
It's maybe it didn't skip, but it looks now for majority like it never happened. Yes.
Yeah. You're talking about, let's say, historical, or Poland as a country dominated by a narrative somewhere between history and mythology.
Yeah.
You talk about the church.
Yeah.
You talk the church, a tribal nationalist ideology.
Yeah.
You haven't even mentioned Holocaust.
No, because I had only 3 minutes or 2. I don't know. I will.
Of course.
I will, because it's very important. Yeah.
You've written about how the society in Poland has not been able to work through that memory and experience, instead replacing it by a kind of official narratives that makes the Polish citizens look good.
Yes, because the official title or motto of this discussion was the new hatred. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about that, and yes, I would say in most important items in Poland, there's the first items for politics and everything. Neoliberal politics, economy, politics, something that just Professor Erickson said, or radical capitalism with no mercy, let's say like that, with no mercy, and with nothing socialistic in it, because everything which is socialistic have some connection with social, and everything is stupid like that. Yes, I'm just mimicking this very, very common way of thinking in Poland. So this is the third one, and I think that the general frame in Poland for hatred to everything and everybody who are different is have roots in anti-Semitism, Polish anti-Semitism, and more precisely in war between mythology and history, which means that from the year 2000, where it was published in Poland, a very important book of the Polish Jewish historian who lives in the United States, happily for him, called Neighbors.
Jan Gross.
Jan Tomasz Gross. And before him also, but it wasn't so very important. The others had not as much success. The amount of articles, books, text on real attitudes of Poles toward Jews during the Second War is huge. There is a huge knowledge that you can't say, well, I know nothing about that, because if you like to know anything about that, it's very easy. It's very easy. And but the official, there is like something that I can call the official spell, a magical spell, something repeated from I don't know, from the very end of the Second War, is like it's going like that. Poles do everything they could to help Jews. But it was death penalty for that. But even so, we have still the greatest number of trees for righteous in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, which is absolute mythology, mythology, in every sentence.
Yeah. And the way you describe it, this society will never be able to move on if it doesn't, get to terms with this question. My question for you for now, and then we'll move on, is: are you talking about new hatred here, or are you talking about old hatred that bought a new jacket?
Both, because this pattern, in fact, the facts from these new books written by thousands of Polish, not only historians, they are mostly people of culture. And as I said, the access to this knowledge is quite easy. And it's happened that in March this year, it was the 15th anniversary of the March '68, which was completely different spring of the '68. It was the expelling of the rest of the Jews from Poland. So it showed up that, well, yes, some amount of this knowledge was absorbed. So every weekly, for example, was about that. But I want to say that this structure, anti-Semitic structure of a hatred, is solid base for any other form of hatred. So Islam is not excluding this one. It's rather a very good ground for every other form of fear
it's
and
the model,
hatred.
it's the base.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Gabor-Stein, writer, poet, literary critic, translator. You live in Budapest. You're a professor at the Hungarian Literary History Institute of Eötvös Loránd University. So again, a man of letters who's dropped into this conversation about an accelerating world and the new hatred that might be a product of that. First, same question as for Bojana Kev. Could you relate to Thomas Eriksson's story when you're looking at the society you live in today?
Yes, of course. Accelerating means for me an adventure. It means that people need a slowly and safe life. And it means that they are annoyed about this acceleration. It is for me also very important which experiences people do have with accelerations, with changings. People can have a positive experience with it. It's a win. Or people can have a negative experience with it. It's a loss. Maybe the Hungarian society could have not a specific, but his own experiences with changings. It's a very negative experience. In the 20th century, the Hungarian society, the different parts of the Hungarian society, because I even because of the experiences of the 20th century, I cannot speak about the unified Hungarian, so-called Hungarian society. But you know, I even told on my grandmother, who was born 1911, and she had a long life. She died at 96, so she died 2007, and she survived 2 world wars. The second one, as a Jew, was to surviving. The second one it was just very difficult. She survived 3 revolutions, many system changings in Hungary, very many technical changings. Of course, I can remember she was very much afraid to go upstairs with an elevator, as I was 7, you know. And the Hungarian society had an experience that every changing is a loss. It means they are very much afraid of it, and they need very hard a leader who can save the society against this changing. It means also for me, and it is also a very important point for me, that the common imagination of a country, the common fantasy of a country is just very important in which kind of politics they can use. The imaginations of the imagination of Hungary, and I say it's so-called Hungary because there are many Hungaries. So it is a very much feudalistic kind of imagination. They need a leader who can save them against the changing. They need an idol of a father who, with it, they can avoid to take the relationship for their own life. And this tool of reacting is completely gives a completely incapability to give good answers on that. And another thing that in this common way of fantasy, how they want to save their identity. Identity is for me a completely empty word. We don't have any identity. It is they need for that, because it's empty. They need for that an enemy, something who is different. Jews are the mirrors. And in Hungary, it is just very important because through the First World War actually not through the First World War, just because of the Hungarian politics before, on the end of the 19th century. Hungary became a very homogenic country. We do have only other nationalities, just gypsies and a little minority of Germans, Slovaks, Jews, which are not a national minority. Hungary is a very much homogenic country, and it means that they don't have the mirror, and they need it. They need a virtual enemy.
This is very, very essential what you say. Society needs the other, needs the mirror, needs the Jews, the Muslims, the Roma, whatever.
We need the other because the otherness comes before the selfness.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Let's return to you, Thomas Eriksson. This is complex material. I hope you're following, because it's also, both of you are very eloquent in describing the sad shape of dominant part of your society. Gabor Stein, Bozsánikev describes country as in a struggle between history and mythology. Gabor Stein says in Hungary, the dominant narrative is every change is a loss. Now, could you try to fit in these stories into your helicopter view? Because I'd say every change is a loss, sure. I can imagine you working at the university, no, not you. Mr. Orban sitting at his desk, complaining that internet is slow today. So internet's actually a change for the good for him. But he's building a wall against refugees, because that is a change he doesn't want. So there's changes going on different levels.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, I think there's a big sort of sorting. Sorry.
One sentence for that. Mr. Orban is not annoying through the changing. He used them for his power. I don't want to speak about Mr. Orban because it's an empty name.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but I think
thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Yeah. But there are a couple of things. I mean, I think your point about identities being relational is really well taken, and it's very important that all identities are contrasts with what they are not, which means that whoever you see yourself as depends on who you're comparing yourself with at this very moment. I mean, when I'm with women, I become a man, right? If I'm with people from Africa, I become European. And if I socialize with economists, I become an anthropologist, no matter what country they come from. Mm-hmm. So this obsession with the ethnic and national identities that we are witnessing now really needs to be addressed. And we should remember in this part of Europe that only 100 years ago, that sort of thing mattered, but not in the same way as it does now, not in an exclusive way. This was a cosmopolitan crossroads. I mean, Pressburg was a city where people lived side by side, and they didn't see that diversity as being a problem, almost like in Hindu India, you know, where difference is not seen as a problem, but rather as an enrichment, because you can do something that I can't, and we complement each other. So there are these ways of thinking about identity as well. And I think that many men and women see the opposite gender in the same way, okay? That it would have been very boring, you know, to have this world with only one gender, sort of. So in other words, there's a complementarity. So that is the positive take on diversity, which is crucial in this day and age of building walls and obsession with purity and the fear of the kind of complexity which is created by these overheating processes. So I think that's one sort of way to begin to think about identity, that we insist that people have many identifications. We identify with many facets of who we are. So whoever you see yourself in the mirror in the morning depends on your mood, you know? It depends on what time of the year it is. It depends on whether you had a good sleep. And that's your identity. It shifts. It's chameleon-like. Yeah.
one sentence. What's the root of the identity? What's the root of the imagination and panical paranoia to have an identity? This is, I think, to want to be different. So it's a thinking which is based on differences. But we could have another way of thinking, which would be based on similarities. And it gives a new kind. It would give us a new kind of identity. And a very important experience was for me of the last public discussion that we are similar in different countries. And that's just very important, I think, instead of this paranoia of differences.
An identity based on similarities. And you're not talking about that we're all users of Facebook. You're talking about more essential things that we have in common. Yeah.
I mean, all human beings have something in common. I think that's incredibly important when we think about these things. But one thing that I think we should address is we need to go back in history sometimes. We need to go sideways to see how people solve these issues in other communities, in other societies. To stimulate our own intellectual and political imagination is crucial. That we know something about our own society, but we should also know something about others. So what was it that happened when class politics was replaced with identity politics? You know, the problem is not the collective identity as such, as Claudia Magis writes beautifully about in his book about the Danube, I mean, which is a river flowing through this very city, that being a fascist doesn't mean that you love your 19th century national poets, or the place you grew up, or your parents, or whatever. But it's loving all these things and not understanding that other people who live in a different place, they love their parents, their 19th century poets, their hometown, and they're just as good as you. That's the root of fascism, not being tolerant. So the shift to exclusionary identity politics is what should be addressed there. And what happened to class politics as a marker of identity?
You wanted to respond, yeah?
Well, yes. So I have a question or a doubt, because I do understand what you said about that you have a mirror in something that is different, but it also have to be a kind of condition. I don't know how of what a cultural condition, economical condition. I don't know that you can use that mirror, because Poland before war was the nation of. From my head, so I could be not very precise, about 28 millions, including 6 millions of Ukrainians, 3.5 millions of Jews, about 500,000 of Germans, some Lithuanians, some Belarusians, and other ethnicities. And on the brink of the Second War, Polish nation, the dominant nation, was dominant, after all. Polish, let's say, Catholic nation was in their majority, don't say everybody, but majority, anti-Semitic, and Ukrainians generally hate Poles for being suppressed. Lithuanians to this day have some resentments for Poles, and so on, and so on, so on. So it was a lot of mirrors, only not possibility to use them, not possibility in your mindset to use those mirrors. Yes? So what is the condition when we can use the mirrors as the mirrors? Right?
Yes,
And
good question. If the mirrors are there. Now, I wanna go back to Thomas Eriksson's introduction, because the title of the panel is New Hatred. You already said we're talking about new hatred old hatred,
Yeah.
they're both.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is, you gave us this high-speed introduction about an accelerating world, an overheating world. This is a 21st century phenomenon that you're describing. We start talking, it's not a 21st century phenomenon, but as you described it, since, let's say, the 90s, it accelerated in double speed. Now we're talking about situation in society in Poland and Hungary. Within 10 minutes, we're talking about 20th century, 19th century. This, how do we explain this? How does the question of Thomas Eriksson about the results, the products of acceleration in 21st century lead us immediately into the past? Do you get my question?
Well, there's the old and there's the new, I guess. There is the old and there's the new. I mean, one generic problem about using history for contemporary political projects is that everything has happened in the past, so you can use the history almost for everything. But not quite, because as Bozena Kef very importantly points out, there are traumas in European history that have not been dealt with properly. In some countries, they're more skillful at dealing with these traumas than in others. In my own country, where we hardly had any Jews at all, there's a current heated controversy around the resistance movements, negligence of the Jews. They didn't really care. They just wanted to get the Germans out and that sort of thing. So we have our traumas. Just like in the United States, you have the trauma of genocide of Native Americans and slavery, which are also not being addressed properly. So clearly, history comes back to us, and we can't really get rid of it because it's part of the narrative of our species. It's our story. It goes back. But at the same time, there is something which is new as well. And the old becomes new, and the old is being repackaged, or the new is being repackaged to make it appear as old. Just like, I mean, if you take Yugoslavia 25 years ago, when war erupted there, these problems had already been solved. You know, in 1946, the problems have been solved, and suddenly they re-emerge as if they'd never been gone. So clearly, this was a result of political manipulation of historical symbols, which they used in very sort of cunning and strategic ways to push the kind of buttons that might generate hatred. And we should be wary of that. And therefore, I think what Gabor Schein says about similarities, that all humans have something in common, the universality of humanity, it's so important these days, that we're all in the same boat together.
Yeah, let's speak about the future. I would be very happy if a Hungarian would sit here in the last debate and not in that. It would mean that in Hungary there is a new political movement which can change the political life, and there was nobody from Hungary, and I think the thing is that if you want to change the common fantasy, the common imagination of a country, therefore you have to give them new symbols. I would say new myths, which can help them to be a winner in the history. In history means changing, and it deals, of course, with the past, because you have to know how are the symbols, the way of imaginations of people, and it has a very important function, because I just mentioned that there is no one Hungary, there are many Hungaries. The question is, what can bring the many Hungaries together? You need for that symbols, political symbols.
Could you imagine something that might work?
It's a difficult question, because I'm a writer, and during the time I'm working on a novel, it is my work to give beneath the imaginations coming from the past and go through the future. and in the structure of a novel, it works. But how can you move it? I mean, in the politics, I'm not a politician, but I write about politics, about essays. I mean, and it is just very hard. It is because you need for that channels. You need for that. I would say here a very old word, intelligence. You know, in the countryside of Hungary, there is no intelligence. There are no teachers. There are no doctors. The churches are completely empty, and it's a lot because most part of the priestess they tell the people just stupid things. There are no channels. There is no media which can play this role of the channeling forms of thinking. You know, I think the first thing is in Hungary to recreate the channels.
Because, as you're saying, the many Hungaries or the many identities in a society in general do not have to be homogenized and dictated from above. You could recognize the many identities, the many Hungaries. You could imagine symbols that stress the similarity instead of the differences. But in your society, in Hungary today, the space for that imagination has been destroyed.
Yeah, and this emptiness is filled up with this empty name, with the name of Mr. Orban. He is the creator of this crisis, and he uses it for his power, which gives him much more money than you can imagine. And that's it. He is a creator of the situation, and I think every leader, every populist leaders, are just creations of the situation. We don't have to fight against them. We do have to fight against this political emptiness. We do have to have new imaginations about our similarities.
Yes, and what you're talking about, I mean, what you're describing, it's almost Orwellian in the sense that there are certain thoughts that cannot be thought anymore because you run such risks by thinking those very thoughts that you should stop doing it. And even in a liberal, open, peaceful, and filthy rich society like the one where I live, we feel that increasingly. So that in the 1990s, people like myself who defended diversity and minority rights, we were denounced as naive. They spoke, well, you're so naive, you don't understand that these people are going to destroy your culture. Whereas in the last few years, increasingly, we're spoken of as traitors and are receiving threats. And that is a small but important nuance, isn't it, between being naive and being a traitor. So threatening language is becoming more common, even in that peaceful country where nothing's going to happen, you know, to me. But still, you have the feeling that there is something rather poisonous in the air these days, and not just in countries like Hungary.
Yeah.
Božena?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Because I wanted to ask Gabor, you said there is no identity. Identity is an empty word. Okay, maybe we use word identity in different meanings, but I would say by Gombrowicz, who is my beloved writer. Maybe I don't know Witold Gombrowicz. Maybe I don't know who I am, but if you tell me just the opposite, I'm protesting, right? So maybe this is something, maybe Orban is an empty name, but maybe this emptiness is full of something. Well, I don't know, is full of the, I don't know, identifications, hopes, and so on, of the millions of other, empty names, I'm not very sure of it. And what I want to say is that I absolutely agree that we need a narrative about the progress. Oh, it's very. I have to tell that the word progress in Poland is connected. I don't know how it is in Hungary. Probably Norwegian is a different story. Is so much connected with the socialist era that we do not use the Polish word for progress, which is postęp, but progress. Just like that, as a new word, a neutral one, but it still means more or less the same, more or less, because rather more it means a progress in economic life. And maybe I just, it's not my merit, so I can say that it is. I just discussed with my partner, Jarosław, who's sitting here, what was the mistake made by these years by the UA politics, that we...
The UA politics?
UA politics,
The
I mean... yes,
EU politics?
Yes, EU, yes, European Union, so I'm sorry. Politics that we are not integrated as Europeans, yes, and just contrary, we are drifted to the nationalistic identities, and we agreed that the aim was the economic growth, and the tool was neoliberal policy, while probably the aim should be a welfare state, yes, and the tool should be more socialistic, liberal policy with a strong accent on I don't know how to do that and how it should be done, integration of the different nations on a different level and different history as Europeans. And then maybe we could build a new story. I mean, a project is always a story also, yes, about the future.
But new story, new project.
Yeah.
Progress in a human meaning, not in an economical meaning.
Not only, and not this shape of...
Requires, that echoes what Gabor Schein said, requires to step towards a higher level where you are communicating with others, not to stay stuck inside your own identity narrative.
Well, yes, and I absolutely don't know how to do that, especially at the point we are. I mean, we as Poland and, oh no, well, so Hungary, France on the brink of Le Pen and so on, so on.
Thomas?
One of the unfortunate things here was that if you look at the sort of the convergence of different tendencies in history, is that the realization of global market capitalism, or neoliberalism as it's sometimes called, it coincided with the liberation of Central and Eastern Europe from communism. So the realization of the Reagan-Thatcher vision of the world came alive and became the only game in town at the same time. And as a result, one never really got a chance to build an alternative welfare state, particularly in as much as the European Union, which to me was always a project of identity and politics, and which somehow was turned into a pure market project. You know, it was all about marketization and about profits, where the economy suddenly was seen as a means of generating huge profits for already filthy, absurdly rich people, instead of satisfying human needs. Had we instead looked at the economy as a means of satisfying human needs across Europe, we might have got a very different picture now, also at the ideological level. So I agree with you, it was a missed opportunity. But it's still not too late. We can do it again.
It's still not too late.
Because it's not.
One more point about the laws changing, the system changing. I mean, 89 and after that. One of the main experience with this changing was that in Hungary and overall in this region, that many people become very deeply poor. In Hungary, it is a country with 10 million inhabitants, circa 3.5 or 4 million people are deeply poor. If you make a trip to the eastern part of the country, it is like you would make a trip in India or in South America. It means also that all these people are falling out of the political nation. They don't vote. They don't have any experiences about democracy. They want to live, they want to survive every day by day. That's everything. And that's the point, I think. Before we think about identity and new politics and so on, we should make a politic which can bring all these people back to the political nation, which can build this all these lives, build new up. It means also that the children they are born in these regions, in these families, they don't have any chance they don't have chances for nothing. And that's the point, I think, and that would be the focus of another politics, and just a joke for that. Progress. It means Hungarian haladás. Maybe that would be the reason why the political imagination of the Hungarians is so pessimistic, because haladás, the first syllabus hal, it means to die. but they don't have anything with each other.
So the space for imagination has been destroyed. The space for future, for many people in the country. You're so, yes. Okay, let's go to the audience, because your analysis is chilling and sharp. It fits in a unexpectedly accurate way in the analysis you've been making. Are we going to solve all of this on the final evening of the Central European Forum right now? I'm not sure. Let's see what we're getting from the audience first.
There's one over there.
Mike, yes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Susanna. I was listening attentively, and I would like to ask Mr. Professor Eriksen, because he was telling us the situation as he sees it. I would like to ask him to also prescribe a recipe. What would he suggest? Because also his speech, the pace of it suggested that he's very much a part of it, that his helicopter point of view is, in a way, influence. You know what I mean. Then, thanks to the poet, we slowed down a little bit. But my question is, what is the recipe for this? If we have a society that is overheated, right? Is it the interconnectivity? Is it the looking for the sense of belonging on the common boat that you've been mentioning? Or what is it? Or is it becoming antisocial? Is it becoming alternative to the society? Is it asocial? What is the alternative? That's one question. Maybe you can also tell your Polish and Hungarian points of view.
That's already a huge question, yeah?
And the second one is, do you have a book that you could sell us tonight?
Which would actually give you the answer you're asking for. Can you take that microphone?
Okay, yes, I'll try to be as brief as I can. Well, regarding the recipe, haven't you noticed how recently politicians no longer sell hope, they sell fear? You know, they tell us not, vote for me and things are going to be great. They say, vote for me or else. The Muslims will take over, the neo-Nazis will take over, the climate is going astray, etc. So they sell suspicion and fear, and they sow the seeds of suspicion and of pessimism, which is not a good way of going about things. So I think what we really need is a positive vision, a collective positive vision. Because in the lack of a positive collective vision, in my country, which is richer than any society has ever been, okay, in history, people are complaining more than they ever did. They complain about everything, and they complain not least about immigrants who've never done them anything wrong. And I mean, immigrants stay in their parts of the city and they basically have jobs and pay their taxes and behave decently. So you sit around and you're a consumer and you complain about people you don't like because you don't have a project. You don't feel like you're part of history. You don't feel that you're part of something important. I believe that some periods in history make us bigger than we are. The Second World War made some people bigger than they were because they were fighting absolute evil, right? So they were making sacrifices and they were risking their lives. And there are also some periods that they make people very small. And in my part of the world, we live in such a period right now, where it's consumerism and suspicion of others. So we need something big and hairy and which can mobilize enthusiasm. And it has to be green, it has to be modern, it has to be humane and cosmopolitan and concerned with social justice. And it has to entail slowing down, cooling down, and scaling down.
Does the society have an internal thermostat that the hands have not to burn, as you were saying in the beginning, the metaphor with the burning hands?
Yeah, that thermostat has to come from below and inside. We can't rely on the forces above us, because that's corporate capitalism, which is going to continue to overheat the world until it burns up. So it has to come from below, the social movements, you and me.
We are the thermostat. Yes. Okay.
I would come here one step before. I think the most important experience of people is not the fear; it is the irritation about old changing and so on. There is two answers on irritations. The one answer is, okay, you have to have fear about your irritation. It's an answer which you don't have to have any new ideas to say. Your answer could be fear. This is how you can handle your irritation. This is what you can feel. You don't know what you are feeling. This is what you are feeling. For example, in Hungary there are no migrants, but everybody has fear from migrants. Everybody, people didn't see any migrants in a Hungarian village. It was many occasions that people, for example, in a Hungarian village, people saw a woman coming from the hairdressing in a hair cart. And people called the policeman. There is a migrant, and she was just a woman coming from the hairdressing. Another way could be, another answer would be on irritation, the hope, because the crisis is a situation which gives you the occasion to make things better. And this is just very hard. How could you give a positive answer on irritation? And I think that would be the job of politicians. That would be the job of politicians. And if they don't want to give positive answers on irritation, then the societies has to press them to give new answers,
As
or
we've
or
seen.
we have to give new answers, and and therefore I would be just very happy if somebody from Hungary would sit in the last public debate
Next year?
instead of mine.
Next year. Okay. Who else? Over here.
Môžem hovoriť aj po slovensky, keďže je to také nemoderné.
May I speak Slovak? It doesn't seem to be very modern to speak Slovak. Ďakujeme za techniku. I just would like to I would like to ask whether I can speak Slovak. It may seem to be okay. I can speak Slovak. Mr. Erickson, you as anthropologist, you certainly know the direction in American psychology, which is called I did not
Behavioralism.
Oh, behavioralism. The Americans invented an approach in psychology consisting in a statistical perception of behavior of animals and humans. And the observation is that if rats has a very limited space, they start eating one another, they start to be nervous, and they stop reproducing. People are not rats, but what do you think? How many billions of people can live in the world without devouring one another, without suffering psychological distress. But it seems that nobody seems to limit population growth to a level which is economically feasible. Or let's take an example. If somebody is falling from a skyscraper, he may said when he is at the level of the 50th floor, it's still quite good. At the level of the 20th floor, well, it's not so good, but it's still not so bad. Anyway, Miss.
And maybe Miss Merkel has created Orban. Maybe what she did is that Orban is a reaction to something. I think that people wouldn't vote for Orban if there were not this problem of migration. So my question is, how many billions of people could live on the earth, and how to prevent overheating of economy? Because capitalism only wants to produce profit and exploit everything until everything is destroyed. Maybe it wouldn't be appropriate to limit population, and whether Mrs. Merkel is not the one who created Orban.
You suggest between Merkel and Orban, we will discard it off this table. Otherwise, I think you might be touching upon the essence of your work.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yes, I mean, urban growth in the global south, it has been phenomenal. It's one of the chapters in the overheating book, in fact, is about cities and about growth of cities. But population growth is going up and down. In some parts of the world, the population is going down. In other parts, it's going up. And it's striking, isn't it, how politicians in every country want the population in their own country to increase, but everybody else should have fewer children, which shows to me the limitations of nationalism. But the answer to your question is that we human beings can be quite flexible. We can live in megacities and have good lives. You can live in Shanghai or Sao Paulo and have good lives. The real problem arises when we start to exhaust non-renewable resources, when we start to run out of water, we start to run out of phosphates, which are necessary for chemical fertilizer in order to produce food, when we reach a point where there is more plastic than fish in the oceans, and so on. That's when we're going to reach a limit. So I would say shortly that there is no absolute limit on the number of people, but there is certainly an absolute limit on the amount of resources that we can extract. So we should be worried about population growth, the way things are going. If everybody just sat still and ate a bowl of rice, we would have been fine. But as long as everybody wants their smartphone and their holiday and their electric car, we're not.
Thank you. One or two last questions. This is your opportunity before the forum closes.
Good evening. My name is Andra, and I would like to ask you, what do you think, how much was the world slower in the year 1989, and in which ways?
It's a good question.
I could answer quickly and then you can take over. I would say that we have to keep in mind that overheating doesn't mean that everything heats up. I mean, some places cool down, sometimes involuntarily. All of a sudden, nothing happens. Nobody cares about me. And dust is settling, you know, on the factories and on the machinery and so on and so forth. So for many people, the problem is not too much speed, but too much slowness. But there was far more slowness before 1989, for example, in the realm of communication and information, of travel and mobility. I mean, traveling by plane was still very expensive in the early 1990s when I started to go to conferences. You put on a tie. You felt that you were, you know, you would be almost treated like nobility when you entered the plane because it was expensive and rare. And now taking a plane is almost like taking a bus. So the world was slower in many ways before 1989.
How was that for you?
We are probably from the slower part of Europe, so it wasn't such a big difference. And probably still for me, the plane is not in the price of a bus. So, well, of course, I feel the acceleration. Of course, I know, I'm aware of this. But I cannot answer the question how much slower it is. Much slower it was. But I don't know what is the clue.
I would tell you a story. In '94, I was studying at the university, and we had an exam, and the first thing was '94. Two things to write an email. It was before World Wide Web, to write an email and to go to the website of the Washington Capitol Library. And I was just completely unable to write and send a mail and to go to the website of the Washington Library. At the time, I wrote my poems and my short stories on typewriter. And I thought, okay, maybe I would live without emails and without internet. I could write in the future all my things with a typewriter. Why not? It was possible for me in the past, and it went 1 year or 2 years, and I couldn't imagine my life without a computer, writing emails. And to have websites and to read books which are not in my hand, we are able to be much faster without being faster in our inside. So that would be my answer. This life were much slower. And the future is going to be much faster. But the question is how we can handle it, and we can handle it without to be destroyed through this speedness.
Yes. I mean, I realize, as Chris has also pointed out, that I've been speaking very much this evening from the sort of the level of the helicopter circling the world.
The drone, I would say.
But keep in mind that we also, as anthropologists, we also crawl around on all fours with a magnifying glass, studying the grains of sand on the beach. So we try to combine both. And so I would like to end with just a comment. I mean, inspired by these two literary persons next to me who speak more slowly and in a different register than what I usually do, and who teach us something about what it is, to be a real human being. Because, so I'd like to scale down to the level of the individual. What does overheating do to us mentally? Yes, it overheats the world and it creates a lot of problems in the world, but at the level of human psychology, what overheating does is that it fills our minds, usually with rubbish. So we lose flexibility. When something happens all the time, through media consumption, through information, through the onslaught of whatever you've got on your smartphone, then nothing really happens because you have no flexibility. So the only way you can be creative is by lying on the sofa and doing nothing. Because it's only when nothing in particular happens that anything could happen. And this is why slowness is so important.
Coming from the professor of speed, that is a beautiful thing to say.
And one more thing. At the time where electricity was invited, it took a long time in that people could use electricity in fabrics. There was something, electricity, a new way of production, but you need time to know what to do with it. Maybe internet is the same. Maybe we don't even know what to do with it. We need much more time to learn how to use it, and maybe. If we are unable to learn it, it irritates us. I can imagine that that's the sort of, for example, of internet and many things which are irritating us.
Well, but if I can add something, but imagine that we are magically somehow societies that are self-governed, yes, and using the immediate democracy in small societies, and then it really makes sense to have this kind of devices to just creating a social life, and we are using those tools to create a social life. We are using them.
Yeah, we are.
Because it depends what it is. It depends on how we are using the thing.
Of course.
Thing are not using us in
as
fact.
human beings with our own facilities.
Yeah.
I have a final question up here.
Professor Eriksson, you, in a wonderful way...
Please introduce yourself.
Yes.
Professor
Martin Butera from Bratislava. I'm returning to the beginning of this fascinating panel and to your talk about overheating and imagining that you are flying in your helicopter all over the globe. Could you tell us, or could you somehow symbolically point at perhaps 3 territories, 3 regions, 3 continents or 3 states or 3 cities where you would like to land, or where you would like to see the mankind to land in order to do what you suggested, to slowing down, cooling down and scaling down?
Okay, you're asking a terrible question here. So he's gonna say, I don't know, San Francisco, and then suddenly 7 billion people are gonna land in San Francisco? Okay, let's see what the answer is.
Yeah, but you know, I think, I mean, Pressburg, before the First World War, was not a bad place. I think where the speed was just right, and the connectedness was fine. It was cosmopolitan, but people had the time to move slowly and to be thoughtful, and they could smoke a pipe, you know, and have some cognac in front of the fireplace, and discuss the state of the world in a reasoned way without being too stressed. Or Oslo in the 1970s, before we found oil in the North Sea. We were doing really well. It was just right. We were just rich enough. We were a bit poorer than the Swedes, you know, so we were sort of envious of people in Sweden. And they also had glamour, you know, they had ABBA and Volvo and IKEA and stuff, and we just had a lot of fish, you know. But we were fine, we were good, and we had to look forward to things. We had to save money, you know, to buy a new stereo or a TV set, and you had to look forward to that, and maybe in a year's time you could afford it. So maybe those two would be two places. And the third place, to me, would have to be a tropical island with coconut trees, okay? where the rhythm is naturally slow because it's so hot, you know?
Yeah. Okay, this last one, we're not going to destroy it. Pressburg before First World War is over. Let's all move to Oslo 1972. Yeah? Okay, interesting. Okay, I think the Central European Forum is over for today. The main question, let's demand the impossible. It's been the most optimistic question the Forum has put forward to us in the past few years, because I noticed the past few years the titles were getting gloomier and gloomier. This time at least, let's demand the impossible. And that is what people here have been trying to do. We saw Svetlana Alexievich talking about hope against hope. We saw Krastev, Nugared, and Snyder trying to talk about creating ideals in a world where there seems to be no future. Today, Eric was here, who had to leave, unfortunately, in the meantime, to save Norway. But he was here, he faced evil in person and came out of that experience to dedicate himself to society. Then, of course, we saw the inspirational stories, experiences, and ambitions of the people who are now mobilizing tens of thousands of people on the street. And I hope, yes, next year there will be somebody from Hungary there as well. And now you took us through an accelerating world, an overheating world, which is actually, what you were saying was we should be very careful what we wish for. Yes, we could demand the impossible, but be careful about your demands, because otherwise you'll end up in a world that's gonna explode in fire and flames. Božena, Kev, Gabor Shine, both of you are admirable in the way that you're merciless in the description of the society that you live in, the dominant rhetorics, the narratives. But even then, there is a space for, at least you've been able to show us that you know what is missing. And what is missing is maybe the first step towards what could be better. I'm very grateful that you did that effort. I've been sitting on the edge of my chair for 4 hours because of your exciting stories, and otherwise I would have fallen backwards. I just want to thank all of you and the organization, Gabor, Božena, Thomas, very much for this.
Thank you very much.
Or just I'm unable to. Yeah, please, just for 1 more second. Take your headsets. I'm going to say something in Slovak.
I only want to say that when me and Andrea have come with this slogan, "Demand the impossible," as a slogan of this year, that was an idea which occurred to us, I don't know, a year, 10 months ago, and we were not realizing that it will be really something that applies 100% to this year event, which is a proof that it can be realistic to demand the impossible. And we were able to get this impossible only because many of you, because of our friends, volunteers who are here with us, many have helped, and many of those are here today with us. And it's also due to our interpreters. It's the best team you can find in Slovakia. And also they have supported us and enabled us to have interpretation here. And I would also like to thank a person who sits there at the edge of the chair the whole afternoon, because he gave a sense to this, and his name is Chris Kellermans. That's all. Thank you very much.